following the end of the Cold War and title of our Sovyet Sonrası, that is the end of Soviet times, Soviet period time. What we are seeing now, these are attempts by Russian leadership, Moscow authorities, to get somehow back what was once belonging to that Soviet, Russian state empire. So there, and also we can find many similarities between 1783 and 2014. Russia has a large, very vast experience how to behave with their different people and Muslim people in that way. So everyone knows what happened in 2014 in Russian view, as they would try to present it as that, call it the Ukrainian crisis, civil war, rebellion. In fact, one has to call it by its own name. It was a Russian aggression, Russian invasion, which started in Crimea and then continued in the eastern Ukraine. And for me, this topic has also a personal dimension. I'm coming from the eastern part of Ukraine, which is not shown here, but also Donetsk and Lugansk region, very close to Russian borders. They're also now under occupation. So, starting point, what happened? Russian aggression, Russian invasion, and yeah, these are not just my comments, because this is my personal experience, my country, but the world community defined it as an aggression, and the definition of aggression, which was elaborated in 1970s, 1974, completely corresponds what was done by Russia, and then it violated so many international agreements, documents, starting with the Charter of the United Nations about integrity of borders, and then Helsinki Final Act. We can also look. I will open that. So everyone knows these 10 principles of behavior among states. One by one we can read them. Sovereign equality, refraining from threat of use of force, inviolability of borders, peaceful settlement of disputes, and so on and so on. Actually, briefly, all these 10 principles were violated, and it's also just like a fact which is recognized by the United Nations General Assembly, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Parliamentary Assembly of European Council. Annually, every year, they condemn this, what happened, but nothing changed. And what I am talking, what people may talk, we can just comment, but real life is real life, and what is happening out there, it doesn't depend on what we are talking, what we will be talking about. So the list of resolutions about that violating human rights, violating international agreements would be so long. A part of those, Russia violated its own international agreements, which were concluded during the creation of the Commonwealth of Independent States, Bağımsız Devletler Topluluğu, Almata Declaration, then Budapest Memorandum, the Treaty on, I quote, friendship with Ukraine. So, in all those treaties, the integrity of Ukrainian borders were recognized and even guaranteed, as in Budapest Memorandum. Why did it happen? What are the explanation and the Russian view for that? There are 2 points which can be applied to Ukraine in general and to the Crimea, the native land of Crimean Tatar people, to be more close to our topic. Russia claims all those territories which once were part of the Russian Empire, were controlled by Moscow as its own, and historically as its own. And the second point, which is more important, it claims those territories which are populated by ethnic Russians, people speaking Russian language or Russian-speaking people. So these are 2 points which are used there. The central thesis is divided people. Russian nation is divided, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a huge tragedy, catastrophe, and all those so many Russian-speaking Russian people living abroad, the Russian Federation, they finally have to be united, even that way, with the motherland and so on. The thesis of divided people. But if you would look at this, how come that Russian people, Russian-speaking people, make a majority in Crimea or in southeastern Ukraine? This was used by Russian President Vladimir Putin in his famous speech during the celebrations of Crimea occupation, annexation of Crimea in 2014. He said that finally our people reunited with their motherland, but how come that? This is the result of the long process of, and in this respect, both Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars have similar experiences, because only during the life of 2 generations, maybe 3 generations in the Soviet Union, the ethnic picture changed dramatically. In Crimea, it starts since the late 18th century, and all policies of Russian Empire were directed to, had their aim to decrease the Crimean population. Same in Ukraine, and there are 2 big experiences of Crimeans and Ukrainians are deportation of 1944, well-known event, no need to comment it somehow. Or for Ukrainians, the aimed purposeful famine of 1932-1933. both had their aim to change the ethnic picture. And now these crimes of the Soviet regime, they enable Russian president say that in these territories we have many Russians, speaking Russian population, ethnic Russians, and we have to defend them, protect, and unite with their mother country. But my example is the Donbas eastern area. Also, all the time it never was Russian. It became Russian only throughout the 20th century. Same for Crimea. It's how it became Russian. How Russian can say that Crimea is a historically Russian land, land of Russian glory, and so. And no, not a word about Crimea, Crimean history. Now, following all this discourse, imperial discourse, the practical policies, both in the 19th centuries, in the 20th century, the Crimean Tatars as a people, they simply do not fit into that picture of Russian land of Russian glory. So for imperial authorities, for central authorities, for Moscow authorities, this makes indeed a problem how to deal with that land of Russian glory. But how about history of Crimean Khanate? How about the people living there, and not just living there? Crimean Tatars have their own land there as a people. They were formed there, and they don't have any other country native lands. This is known fact. So what has to be done throughout the 19th centuries, 20th centuries, all policies, Russian policies, as I said, were directed to decrease the number of Crimean Tatar peoples in different ways. It not necessarily just genocide and